Hello and welcome back to Podcast with a K. I'm your host, Karla with a K, and I'm alone in the virtual studio. No guests this week except for you, my dear listeners and chatters. You're listening to WECS 90.1 FM, and if you want to be a part of this conversation or any future conversations, you can tweet us at PODKASTXK, that's PodKastXK on Twitter, or join live here on Twitch at twitch.tv/KarlyGirl, that's KarlyGiirl. Back again for another week. August is coming to a close, and what does that mean but time for, new beginnings, as summer eventually will dwindle down, and we'll have to go into autumn, which is great, I guess, if you like fall. I'm already missing summer, though. We rang in today's episode with some Chappell Roan, Pink Pony Club, to be exact. And I've been kind of on a Chappell Roan kick like the rest of the world. I know, another conversation about Chappell Roan, but this is a good one, I promise. And it's not exactly a conversation about Chappell Roan, but rather about how her story reflects into my life. And this is going to be more of a conversation about impostor syndrome and success versus fulfillment. And so now I'm sure you're wondering, what is this gap that we must bridge together, right? And don't you worry, I will take us there. So basically, I saw a video of Chappell Roan performing Pink Pony Club, and I'll explain this a little bit later, but in case anyone is unfamiliar with the story of Chappell Roan beyond her being just, the hot new pop star, and how she's dealing with that lifestyle and that success, etc. She originally, I found out about her from a contributor for Clean Teeth Magazine. Clean Teeth Magazine, of course, being the publication that me and my friend Abby run. Abby has been on the podcast, and we have this publication, and one of the contributors covered her show back in October, and I went on a deep dive because I like to generally know who our contributors are covering, and I fell in love with her vibe. You guys know that I've been on a punk rock / alt indie kick, so imagine my surprise when I found myself getting into some good old classic girly pop. But her background is a little wild. In summary, the backstory of Chappell Roan is she's 26 now. And when she was 14 years old, she auditioned for America's Got Talent, started doing covers. America's Got Talent went nowhere, but through her covers, she started getting attention from record labels. One thing leads to another. She gets signed to Atlantic. While she is signed to Atlantic, she does a tour and an album, but it wasn't profitable enough. It wasn't exactly what Atlantic was expecting, so they dropped her. She has to go back home. She has to work here. She has to work there. She goes back to California to try to keep working. Same thing here, there, everywhere. Kept doing music, working whatever odd jobs. Like I think it's a donut shop and a drive-through and being a nanny. Like, the type of job where you go to work and somebody asks you, so what do you do for a living? Or rather, what do you do for work? Or rather, what do you do in general, right? Like, I feel like we've all, unless you're lucky enough to not have had to live that life, right? You work a service job and everyone always asks you, so what do you do? And your answer is never like, well, this, right? Like you're always doing that to fund something else. And I felt kind of validated in that because it's like, it's one of those moments you're like, wow, celebrities, they're just like us, which obviously, everyone's just people. And that's, a big part of the narrative around Chappell Roan right now is that she's just a person and she wants to be treated like a person and with respect, etc. Which obviously any and all people deserve. But that's a tangent that I don't think we'll go on tonight specifically. I'm more focused today on this story of her continuing to do what she had to do, right? To do what it takes and to do what she wanted to do. And she kept doing music until something stuck. And even though it really wasn't, it seemed like an overnight success, right? Like she's putting out her music, she's putting out her songs, her albums, kind of independent or working in collaboration with people that she had met, etc. And it kind of goes into this like crazy whirlwind story because her producer, I think, had been working with Olivia Rodrigo, who also kind of got big overnight. But she had, I think, didn't Olivia Rodrigo have a Disney start? I think so. In any case, she ends up opening for Olivia Rodrigo, which kind of puts her back in the public eye and more so mainstream, right? She's no longer just doing like, not just doing, obviously, NPR Tiny Desk is kind of huge, but she's no longer just doing like these like one-off interviews like, oh, so you're kind of getting big, right? Anyway, good luck, right? Like now she's the front runner, right? She's the one that people want. And so obviously, right, this puts her back into the public eye. And, you know, she's had the type of career blow up right now where Bonnaroo has to move her to the main stage because there's so many people that are trying to see her. And the reason that any of this is even on my mind right now, right? Like I said, I went on this deep dive in October of last year. It's been almost a year. And, you know, I've personally liked the songs and stuff since then. But seeing this kind of go crazy towards, you know, the more recent times, it had me thinking about how this wasn't really an overnight success. Everyone keeps calling her an overnight success, but from what I had read, she'd been doing this since, you know, almost 10 years ago. And the reason I keep getting sidetracked because it really is such a crazy thing for something like this to happen, right? Like you see her and you want to compare her to like, you know, Billie Eilish or Olivia Rodrigo or Sabrina Carpenter, but those are people who already kind of had a foot in the door with the industry. And this is somebody who had nothing but her own talent and her own drive to do it. And the reason that this is on my mind is because I saw a TikTok the other day and it's of Chappell Roan performing Pink Pony Club at some like park at some community event. And you see the crowd, which a crowd is in quotation marks, right? Like the people at that park could not fit in my bedroom right now. But compared to the scenes that we're used to seeing around her, there's maybe like 30, 40, 50 people there. And I think the caption says something along the lines of imagine being Chappell Roan and performing for 50 people versus 50,000 or something like that. But this is in 2021 and 2021 is 3 years ago, right? That's not even the 10 years ago that we're talking about of her originally auditioning for America's Got Talent or being signed to Atlantic, right? Like this is 3 years ago. 3 years ago being right before I think I tried to brush back up on her history. 3 years ago would have been 2021, so right before opening for Olivia Rodrigo and having that kind of like push her career into you know the everyday. But 3 years ago she was performing Pink Pony Club for, you know, almost nobody at a random place at a random gig, okay? And the comparison between that and what her concerts are now, whenever she was performing here in my state, granted she was performing in the capital, but whenever she was here, they essentially had to shut down the entire area around the venue because it wasn't just people filling the venue and the venue's grounds and the venue's parking lot, right? It was the surrounding streets and neighborhoods and balconies and parking decks and gas stations, anywhere and everywhere that could hear her or had a vantage point to see the stage, as I think it was an amphitheater, was full. And this wasn't just an isolated incident in my state. Like this has been happening worldwide, basically, where the cops haven't even been trying to fight it or making people leave. Like there's that many people that want to see this show and want to see her that they're essentially locking down cities for her. I mean, you know, for somebody to have to be moved to the main stage to accommodate as many people as are in that crowd, right? As many concert goers. And it doesn't matter if they're OG fans or just people who are curious or people who are hopping on a bandwagon. Like the fact of the matter is that the crowds are there, right? It's been a while since there's been like a big, crazy new pop star, and one that I like at that. I've stated my thoughts on modern pop and like the journey that it's trying to find itself again, right? But like I could sit here and break down the music and tell y'all why the music is so good, but what I want to focus on is that journey, right? Like, I don't know how anyone else feels. I have the kind of mind where I tend to be a bit of a cynic at heart, which isn't something I love about myself, and it's something that I actively try to fight against. I've told y'all before that I've had kind of like within my personal last 10 or so years, complete shift in perspective and personality, which, most people will have over the course of 10 years. But there's still like lingering elements of that. And for example, me being sarcastic as a joke is one thing, but me being a cynic against myself in my own head is something that every day I have to be like, bro, shut up. What are you talking about? To my own personal self, right? Like you hear quotes like everyone lives life at their own pace, or success isn't about greatness, it's about consistency, or what have you. And that type of quote makes me so heated. Like, I know people say it and people mean well, and people are trying to like comfort you whenever you're kind of like in a hard spot, or whenever you're working for more, whenever you're trying to find like a new place for yourself or what have you. And for me, it's more frustrating because it's like, yeah, I know, but like that's not helpful right now, right? Like, what am I supposed to do about that? Because then I start thinking, well, I'm working hard and like I'm doing this and I'm doing that, but it's just unfair because I can't do this because of that. I can't change this, so I can't get to this. I start thinking about all of the reasons that I can't, or I'm unable to like push past a certain roadblock, or there's something holding me back that I can't do anything about, and it's kind of just like a fact of life. But at the same time, right? Like, you have to realize, and again, this is kind of like how I think, and I don't know if this is about you. So whenever I say you have to realize, I'm talking a little bit to myself and a little bit in like the figurative second person, like you as a concept, if there's anyone that does feel like this, where it's like, you're still here, you're still doing you. And there are stories like this example of Chappell Roan, which is what sent me in this whole entire thought spiral, that kind of make you stop and think, like, these quotes are cliche for a reason, right? The reason that something becomes a cliche is the same reason that a song gets overplayed. It's because it was originally and organically good. It just feels redundant because of your own attitude, right? Like, we saw it happen with the song from Despicable Me, Happy by Pharrell. Like, it's objectively a good song, or Uptown Funk, or anything by Chappell Roan right now. Like, they're objectively good songs and people like them, and that's what puts them on the mainstream. It's what puts them on the radio, and then the radio is like, wow, the people love it, the people are listening to it. It stays in the top 40 because people are listening to it, and then they play it again and again and again. And that's what happens with quotes like this, right? Like, they're quotes that feel like so redundant and they feel so repetitive, and it's like, yeah, I've heard that before, so what? Those quotes have survived the test of time because they're true, right? I feel like I pick up a lot of quotes from a lot of people. And one of my friends in her own life was going through her own things, and she had been talking about it in therapy, and her therapist told her, you did what you could with what you had. And she was telling us about it because it had helped her a lot. And she, asked us how we felt about that quote, because she was trying to use it to help her find her peace. And, at the moment, of course, we were all very supportive because in her case, it was very true. Like, she had done everything that she could. Things went a certain way or a certain different way, and she did what she could. And so after that conversation, it's cool because in the, the time that followed, like, all of us started saying that as a quote, just like we accepted into our day-to-day life. And whenever I get to thinking about things like this, that's kind of a quote that I try to like use to find my peace with things that I can't do anything about, right? And it's like, as many things that I do have in life that are going against me, right? And then, everyone has their own things. Some of us have heavier things than others. Some of us get away with a lot more than others. Some of us have just a luckier streak than others, right? And, there's only so many things that you have control of and so much control over. And it's important, I think, to look back and realize, like, nothing really held you back, right? Like, you made it this far. If something was holding you back, you wouldn't have made it to here. And so that's how I try to think whenever I'm sitting here, like, man, like, what is my version of I got signed by Atlantic and Atlantic dropped me, right? Like, there are things in life that I've held and I've had and I've been so certain that were meant for me and that I had worked towards, and they just didn't work out. And that's okay because I got past it. I kept doing more things and they kept going. And that's kind of how we end up in a place like here, right? And with things in life that feel like I said, this is going to be more of a conversation about imposter syndrome and success and fulfillment. And I think leading up to imposter syndrome, like the first roadblock is not even getting to the point like, oh, I can't do this. I'm not like worthy of this. I'm not going to be able to like meet expectations. I think the first part of that is that like manic push that you give yourself where you're like, oh yeah, dude, I can do anything. Like I've done it all before. I can do it again. You know, like I don't know how many people resonate with this, but the way that like my attitude and my ego and my confidence works is that there is a day when I wake up and I'm like, I'm going to do this, and also that because I know how to do this. This will teach me how to do that. And then once I do that, I'll be able to do something else, right? Like there's days when I wake up with all of the drive and dedication and commitment to a new concept, right? And I will put my whole entire full energy into it. And sometimes if it doesn't work out immediately, I'm like, it's fine. I'm still like learning on the job. You know, I learn on the job. I'm a fast learner and that's never stopped me before. I've definitely taken on roles that I was not qualified for and managed to make gold out of it. And I've taken on roles that I was way overqualified for and still managed to learn a lot from like the people and the scenarios that I found myself in. And I think something that's really funny to look back upon and think of is days like that in comparison to days when I'm like, what am I doing? I'm wasting my time. I'm wasting my life. I'm doing this. I'm wasting too much time on this. I'm wasting too much time on that. I haven't even started focusing on this or working on this and then you start breaking down every single one of your efforts. And it's like whenever you try to start a new hobby or learn a new language, and it's obviously really fun and exciting at first. That first week is great because you're like in that honeymoon phase with that concept and with that idea. And you just want nothing more than to immerse yourself in it. And then week 2 hits. And when week 2 hits, you start feeling like, oh, man, this is a lot more trouble than it's worth. I bit off more than I could chew. And then you start thinking about it that way. Like you start thinking about it with the mentality of like, is it going to be just this forever? It's going to be like this forever? Like, that's it. That's just... you know, what's next? What was the point of this? What was the purpose? And you start losing track of why you originally wanted it so bad and why you originally even started trying it in the first place, which is you thought it was cool or you thought it was fun or you thought it would lead to something, right? And even if it doesn't lead to anything, like it's still something that you could have had fun or enjoyed doing, but because it didn't immediately pan out into something else or because it wasn't what you thought it was, sometimes you drop it and other times you don't, right? Like I think the learning a language is a better example than picking up a new hobby, although I guess it's kind of the same if you're that type of person where you really want something to commit yourself to that you could see yourself putting some time into, but it just gets so tough for no reason, right? Like whether you're learning to paint or whether you're learning to I don't know, work on cars, or whether you're trying to learn Mandarin, or whether you're trying to, I don't know, make the next TikTok viral clip of the summer, like whatever it is that you're doing. It's only your attitude that's going to get you through it because there's not like a tangible purpose, right? It's not a job that you're working your way up for towards a promotion. It's not a competition that you're going to get a trophy in, right? It's not even something that you have to tell your friends about. It's just something that you are doing with your own time. And only you can measure how good or not you are at doing it by comparing yourself to other people and other things. And on the topic of quotes, right? Like comparison is the thief of joy. And that's so very true because that's where the imposter syndrome starts, right? Like I think the first phase is just that like super crazy adrenaline rush that you start getting whenever you start doing something, or dopamine hit whenever you start doing something fun and cool and exciting and new. And then once the novelty of it wears off, it's kind of like, why was I even doing this in the first place? You know? And so you either again, the you is not you specifically. The you is this conceptual you / me. And you either start like feeling kind of apathetic towards it, like, oh, whatever, that was fun while it lasted, or you start wondering, like, I'm not even good at this. Why am I even doing it, right? Like, I feel it a lot whenever I start working on a new skill, or whenever I start practicing one of my musical instruments again, because you know what? The musical instruments one is very true. Like, there's things like piano that I did for 10 years, and I went and sat in a lesson, and I had somebody holding my hand the entire time, like making sure that I was learning and progressing. Or when I was in band playing percussion, or when I was in choir singing. And then I have things like guitar, where I'm fully self-taught, and I memorize the chords, and I can play any song that you give me the chords to, and I know my favorite songs. I can read the tab, sure, fine. I never learned how to read sheet music and play that on guitar. So if you gave me that, I'd be like, I don't know, I don't want to do that. That looks boring and lame. Like, I would simply just turn away from it. Or there's times when I commit myself to, like, all right, I'm going to learn this riff and it's going to be super sick. But the physical, like, weight of having to hold the guitar, or, like, you know, learn to learn to play the right notes, and then your fingers start blistering because you know, your hands aren't callous enough because you haven't been doing it long enough, right? And that's the point where you have to decide, I'm not even good enough to keep trying, so, like, whatever, like, it hurts, and I'm not having a good time, and I'm not having fun, and it's not even going to be worth it in the end. Like, you start talking yourself out of it because of your own self-doubt and insecurity and just general, like, exhaustion from doing it. Or you're like, dude, I'm going to go get a cube of ice, numb my fingers, take a little hour break, and then keep working on it, right? And then you know, throw yourself into it, and then you lose a week doing it. I think that's a good comparison. That's a good analogy for every other endeavor in life, you know? And it's those little moments where you have to kind of decide if you're going to push past it or let it go. But the thing is that other things aren't as clean cut and dry as that, right? There's a lot of times when you don't even realize that it's the imposter syndrome kicking in or holding you back, right? Like, it's easy to point fingers and be like, it was this thing or this person that stopped me. And there's other times whenever you don't realize that you're the only person that's, like, keeping your own self from going forward and trying to do more, right? Like, again, dude, quotes are the only thing I'm thinking of right now. But, like, what's the quote from Back to the Future where he's like, if you put your mind to it, you can accomplish anything? As you can see, every time that I have only me, myself, and I, and you, my dear listeners and chatters, it's super, super easy for me to get lost in, like, this type of train of thought, because I spend my time consuming content from people that I admire and people that I think are cool and things that I find amusing or entertaining or inspiring. But I always walk away with 1,000,001 quotes. I feel like there's a lot of things and thoughts that I can say, but there's a lot of things that I feel like have been said for me. And I find a lot of comfort, I guess, in that's one thing that I will say is a cliche that I don't take lightly, I guess, is that, like, you're not alone, right? Like, you're not the only person feeling some way, shape, or form. That's why we all resonate with these cliched little quotes. But that shift, in any case, from the brand new honeymoon phase of doing something new and then falling into the imposter syndrome and realizing it, becoming self-aware of the imposter syndrome, I think is what's the craziest part. And, you know, again, there's sometimes when that is all that it is, and there's other times when it's something else that's, like, stopping you from doing it. And then, you know, because you can see that there is a wall between you and the finish line, you're like, well, why would I do it anyway? Like, this is in between me and the marathon, and I don't know how far the freaking wall extends in either direction. So it's like, why would I even try? Like, I should just give up and go home. Like, I know the way back because I just ran the way here. I can't run into the wall. I can't go either way. And then the question is like, oh, well, there's a tree right there. Why not climb the tree and just, hop over the wall and keep on your merry way? Like, like you're running this marathon and this wall wasn't supposed to be here. Or you could run along the side of the wall and see where it ends and then get back on your path. Maybe the path was just tracked wrong. Like, there's a million and one ways to like face a problem like that as something that's super head on and direct and to get around it. Or maybe, you go to the store, right? You grab a pickaxe and you just start chipping away at the wall. Whatever it is, there's a way to get past it if you want to. And I think that's what you have to decide if you want to. Because, on the other side, you can be like, oh, well, who put this wall here? Why would somebody put this wall here? Are they trying to stop me specifically? Are they trying to stop everybody? Do they just love walls? Do they just hate people? Do they just hate paths and marathons? Like, what's going on here? And there's, that train of thought can go on so many different tracks. But I digress. We've reached our halfway point. I'm going to take you guys I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a break from this rant so that we can recenter and realign to the original topic at hand. We're just listening to Chappell Roan tonight. Our next song on the agenda is My Kink is Karma by Chappell Roan. That was My Kink is Karma by Chappell Roan. Again, you're listening to podKast with a K, and I'm your host, Karla with a K, and this is WECS 90.1 FM. If you want to be a part of the conversation, you can tweet us at PODKASTXK, PodKastXK, or join the conversation on twitch.tv/KarlyGirl. That's KarlyGiirl. So, back to the conversation, back to the topic at hand. We're talking about Chappell Roan's 10-year journey being called an overnight success and how that made me reflect upon hustle culture. Not really, I guess, but impostor syndrome and how we measure success. But in short, the part of the tangent that we had reached is that, like, on your own personal journey to find that success or fulfillment, whether it's in a job, in a hobby, in a skill, in anything, right? Like, you're gonna hit roadblocks, you're gonna hit walls, and sometimes it is the world against you, right? Sometimes somebody did put that there specifically to stop you. Somebody didn't like you for whatever reason. Somebody had some unresolved spite and they're projecting onto you. And sometimes people just are mean, right? Sometimes the things that you deserve, that you worked for, are taken away from you, like, without warning. And sometimes it is somebody else's fault, right? In the words of in the words of Lil Wayne, referencing Slumdog Millionaire, sometimes fake friends do write wrong answers on the mirror for you. But you know what? So what, right? Like, that sucks, but that's fine. The only thing you can do is to keep going anyway, right? Like, the world doesn't owe you anything. And that's something that I mean in the most, like, freeing and enlightening and positive and supportive way possible. Like, if you want something and it's a good thing, go for it, right? Make sure it's the right thing for you, because otherwise you're going to kind of, like, get sidetracked and dig yourself into a hole. But, like, there's nothing that should stop you from trying it, right? So like, the point that I'm saying is, like, sometimes it is completely out of your hands and that's what's stopping you. But I think something important to realize is that other times it's yourself, right? It's your own self-doubt. It's your own worries. It's your own apprehension to pushing past and doing more. And that's not to say that you don't want it enough, that you're not, like, working hard enough for it. Sometimes it is insecurity and anxiety, and you just have to, like, this sounds so bumbling, but, like, it's hard to put into words because I think it's something that I live every day and something that a lot of people live every day. Lucian in the chat says it's like having 0 viewers on Twitch going into it and thinking it's going to be easy street, and then it's like a fast-paced sprint versus a slow marathon. She has streamer and art impostor syndrome, and inflation hasn't helped because she measures success with a monetary value because she's a Capricorn. Okay, so there's definitely a lot to touch on there. During the song break, I was talking about how the podcast, right? Like you here right now listening to this, if you are here right now listening to this, has kind of helped me face that head on, right? Like, well, let's take this little walk down the side street, shall we? When I was a kid, I was super shy, but I always went for things anyway, right? Like I was the kid that, like, you know, I had my little group, my little table, and I would either be talking to my friends or I would be like drawing in a notebook, and you know, whenever like things came up like, oh, raise your hand if you want to be line leader, you know, come up to the board and participate, I'd be like, nah, man, hard pass. That's somebody else. I'm drawing the coolest shark right now. I'm talking to my best friend about dragons or whatever it is that you do when you're a kid. But then there would be things like, you want to be class president? Yes, me. Vote for me, actually. I want that. Or, you know, enter this art contest, do this competition. I am somebody who is very, not necessarily goal-oriented or recognition-driven, but I want to see that I have gone from here to there. I want a tangible sense of accomplishment. And measuring success as something monetary is, I guess, the adult version of that. And as far as streamer syndrome goes, and because I associate streaming with the podcast, that's why I started streaming, right? Whenever the podcast started, I've told you guys before, I was in college, I was meeting people, I was having cool conversations, getting to know everyone. And every single time that, you know, I was sitting there talking with somebody, I know it's like a thing where people be like, oh man, this is a crazy conversation, we should start a podcast. And it's mostly like straight white guys that do it, right? But everyone does it. But like, my friends and I would be talking about something and somebody would say that as a joke because I would always take the conversation from small talk into something deep and philosophical and impactful and, like, you know, relevant to whatever. And, you know, at first I was like, yeah, whatever. That's funny. That would be really cool though. Like, we should just vlog these. And then that conversation would come up in a different circle and I'd be like, oh, you know what? We were actually talking about this before and this led to that. And they'd be like, whoa, that's actually so interesting. You should do a podcast. And because of that, like, kind of, because that would happen again later in the day and later in the week, etc., because that kind of went on, and because I had people telling me, you should do this, I'm like, yeah, you know what, I should do this. And so I had already joined the radio club. I'd already had an interest in doing a show. I didn't know what I wanted to do with it, because at this point I was into like the YouTuber podcast that I liked. I liked Jenna Marbles, I liked Philip DeFranco, I liked Ryan Higa, which was people just talking to their friends about different things of different, you know, levels of impact, but they themselves were interesting people. And that's where my imposter syndrome kicked in. Like, well, I think the conversations with my friends are interesting. I think my friends are interesting. So, like, I mean, I could, I guess, but, like, are people going to want to listen to me? And people did, at some point, want to, like, you know, listen and be a part of it, right? And so my happy medium was, all right, I'll do the podcast, but only if you'll do it with me, right? Like, every week I had a different friend be a guest, and then a different friend, a different local figure, a different celebrity. And like, the podcast started growing and growing and growing. And at this point, like, the podcast kind of gave me that start to being like, well, people aren't listening because of any specific person, right? Like, maybe all of my friends are interesting, but if all of my friends are interesting, they must be friends with me for a reason. Like, I started trying to pick apart like things that were in common, and the common element was that it was the podcast, right? And so during that first year, it was super cool to kind of see that go and like kind of take shape, and people asking for guests and people asking for topics. And then the pandemic hit. We all get sent home, no longer have the radio station. And people were like, oh, you should just keep doing it on your own anyway. And I was like, really? Like, no one's going to watch this. The first one I put on YouTube, nobody watched it. It was just me by myself facing my biggest fear of doing a solo podcast. Because again, the podcast I did for my friends, right? And so that our friends could listen in our conversations. Like, we thought it was just a cool, fun little new thing. First episode did nothing. And I was like, you know, it was the first one. Maybe people didn't know about it. Second episode, about the same. Third episode, people found out about it. People tuned in like, oh my God, you actually did it. I watched back your last one. I couldn't be here for the previous one. Sundays late at night and we're not at school anymore. I was like, oh, okay. And so then it started this like rise and fall of like people watching, people tuning in for a certain guest, people wanting to hear whatever conversation I was going to have like by myself in the chat that week, or nobody watching at all. And so it made me face that entire aspect of imposter syndrome. Like, is it about me? Is it about they all have their own things going on in their life? Is it about just this episode was boring? And so, you start going down that list of different things, etc. And Lucian also mentioned having that imposter syndrome with her art, which, as a side note, of course, like you guys all know that I'm a creative in every sense of the word, right? Jack of all artistic trades. The podcast kind of opened up a lot of doors for me. And I feel that same way in a lot of different spaces because there's, like I've gotten to do a lot of cool things. I mentioned Clean Teeth magazine earlier. I've gotten to photograph a lot of shows, and sometimes the artists like the photos, sometimes they don't. And, some are more heartbreaking than others because I like the bands more than others. And I've gotten to do a lot of interviews with people of differing stature, right? Like I really, really enjoyed last week's podcast, which was partially the podcast and partially an interview for Clean Teeth magazine with Moy Cohen, who I had never heard of, who only just now put out his first EP, who's on this like crazy come up. And it was one of my favorite conversations. And, my friends hadn't heard of him, but now they have. And now like he's like become kind of inducted into this circle. And then I've also gotten to talk to people like my most recent one being Steven Sanchez, or I think one of my first ones being Young Gravy and Baby No Money. And like, that's not to name drop, but that's just to kind of show like the range of like what I've done and like what I think is a different way to measure success and fulfillment. And it's not talking to super famous people or super nobodies or my friends or up and coming stars. Like for me, the sense of accomplishment that I get is in getting to do it in the first place, right? Like I've been able to start measuring success and fulfillment in a way that's not money, especially like with my other creative endeavors, right? Like with the podcast, right? I can see how many people are viewing at any given time. I can see how many people are talking in the chat. Sometimes we got a lot of viewers and no chatters. Sometimes I have 2 viewers and they keep a conversation going the entire time. Sometimes nobody chats, nobody views. Somebody hits me up later in the week and they're like, yo, good podcast episode. Somebody watches a TikTok clip. Or sometimes nobody says anything at all. Right? Same with my interviews for Clean Teeth and my photo sets, or with my own artistic endeavors, right? Like there was a time when I was selling stickers and shirts and hats and hoodies every other day, and the money obviously felt like success and the commissions felt like success. And there's other times when I'll go a year without selling very much of anything, but then I'll get asked by my city to come paint at a public event, right? Like my dad's always said that there's siempre hay ojos que te ven, right? Like there's always somebody watching. And I'm like, what if nobody's watching? And he's like, well, maybe God's watching. And I'm like, yeah, okay, Dad. Because like, we all know I believe in science. We all know that something happens and I'm like, the universe is trying to teach me a lesson. And hopefully it is God being like, pay attention here. I saw a post that was like the same way that like a dog will try to go and eat your chocolate chip fudge muffin, but it doesn't understand that it's not good for it and that it's going to do more harm than good, right? Like maybe it's like that for us as people in life, right? Like maybe something's not meant for you. Maybe it's not meant for you yet. Maybe it's something that is going to send you down a bad path, right? Like there's some things that just aren't meant for you. So back to the conversation earlier about sometimes you hold yourself back. Sometimes somebody purposely tries to hold you back. Other times, what if it's simply just not for you? And that's just the world's way of trying to show that to you, if that's something that you believe in, right? Like the flip side of that would be that everything is chaotic and random and has no reason and has no purpose. But in which case, I think that proves the point even more, right? Like whichever way you think, whether it's you or somebody else or a higher power or nothing at all, right? Like if that's how it is and things are going to simply just be as they are, then all that you can do is play the hand that you're dealt and hope for the best, right? Like it's tough. It's really tough. Like I went out with a friend this past weekend and we went to a bar venue type spot, and it usually hosts rock shows and occasionally like grungy country music nights, it looks like. And at this bar, funny enough, was a poster for a Chappell Roan theme night. And I don't know how Chappell Roan measures success, right? Like, she's posted a lot recently about how she wants to be treated as a person, but she's so appreciative for what she has, and this is what she wanted to do, but whatever. I think success for someone like this is having a theme night at a place like that, right? Like, this is a type of place that is the last thing you would expect to see, the last thing you would expect to happen. And yet, this random bar in this random city in my random state, a place in which the scene, the attitude is just not at all that vibe. They're hosting a Chappell Roan theme night. And I'm like, that's pretty cool. Like, that's success right there. And, me and my friend were talking about just like how crazy that was to even see. And this is a friend that I was close to as a kid, and we've recently been catching up here and there. We've only hung out a few times recently, but it's been really cool to kind of get to meet each other, right? Like, we've been talking about like what we do in our lives and like what we're up to. And I essentially told her an abridged version of this, just like in a small talk kind of way. And she just looked at me like with her head like cocked to the side, and she was like, you know what? You're so cool. And it caught me so off guard, because I was like, I'm just, talking about all of the things that I do on the side for free and for fun, but like, whatever. And I was like, really? Because I'd feel a lot cooler if I got paid to do what I do. And she was like, yeah, but so what? You're still getting to do it. Like, that's cool in and of itself. Like, the experience is what's paying you. And it made me kind of sit back, and I was like, yeah, you know what? That's true. Because all of the like little trips and creative endeavors that I've taken upon this year haven't necessarily been like, oh, I'm just going to go do this and that and be crazy, right? Like, I had a couple of really big contracts fall through, some for funding, some for other reasons. And I could not sit idly by, right? As my own life was just kind of passing past me. Like, I took the time that I needed to be upset about, like, oh, why does the world have to be so cruel? And then once I got over it, I was like, all right, well, what am I doing now? I might as well work on my own stuff for a bit. And then one thing leads to another. You find new things to do. You find new contracts. You find new hobbies and jobs and side hustles, etc. And like, none of these are things that I would have gotten to do had I done what I originally intended to do this year, right? Like, this will have to have a part 2 type of podcast about how life is different as an adult once you're not like in a school setting or in an office job, to kind of give you a day-to-day routine, right? Especially in a life like the one that I live. But she's right. Like, it is cool what I'm doing, and not necessarily like, I'm so cool, like I'm tooting my own horn, but it's cool that I've found a way to fill my time that is in some ways monetarily lucrative, in other ways there's no money in it. Either way, like, there's fulfillment in it, right? Like I said, like, the fun part of the things I do for Clean Teeth aren't even necessarily like going to shows and talking to cool people. It's getting to talk to a person like a person, right? It's getting to hear my favorite song. It's getting to find a new creative outlet and do it in a way that sparks conversation and finds common interest, right? Like, I wouldn't have found Chappell Roan if it hadn't been for that one contributor who I think I should shout out, Cameron Montebruno, who photographed Chappell Roan for Clean Teeth. Like, I would have never known about her, right? And it's like that type of thing. And the slogan of the digital publication is something along the lines of connecting people through music, which is really cool and really sweet. But like, that's the fun part of it for me, and it's the reason that I like the podcast, right? Because it lets us have this conversation together and have fun, and get to know each other on a less superficial level. And I think that as much as I do, I find it hard to quantify any of it when I get into the type of mood that has me doubting the validity or impact of it, right? Like, the double-edged sword of imposter syndrome is that, like, the same way that I'm like, oh, things didn't work out because of this, this, and this. When things do work out, I'm like, oh, well, I only got here because I knew the right people, or because I got lucky, or, I'm here, yeah, I guess, but like, I'm not there. So like, it's not worth it. I'm not done yet. And it's hard to enjoy the moment when you're so focused on what it could have been or what it should have been or what it will be. And in taking another quote that I've heard from a friend or whatever, it's, I think, important to learn to live for today and let tomorrow be up to you in that same vein, right? Like, there have been times when I felt like I've had it all and lost it in a stroke of bad luck. And there's times when I've had absolutely nothing. And there are little signs and little happenstances and, you know, the wonderful, I can't go without mentioning like the wonderful and amazing people and friends that kind of show up in my life out of the woodworks, like this past weekend, where someone just reminds you, like, you know, you're still hustling and you're still doing you, and that's enough, and that's good enough, and that's really cool. You know, sometimes it helps to have that like little vote of confidence from someone that isn't yourself, but it's not something that you should need, right? Like, it's a side note. And as a side note, of course, I have such great appreciation and consider myself very blessed and very lucky to have those kinds of friends. Because there's sometimes in all of this where you do feel alone, right? Like, you feel like you're getting left behind and everyone's doing their own thing and everyone's going to go their own ways. And it's like, well, I have nothing left and I have nobody left. Like, what am I doing? And then there's moments like that that kind of like clear the clouds and you just realize like the world stops and you're like, man, isn't life crazy? Because it wasn't that bad forever and it's not that bad at all most of the times, right? And so I think as our time draws to a close, like, to wrap it up, success isn't money or things or a squad or an entourage or not even love and friendship, right? The last two, I think, exist in their own really cool, weird, and unique way. I think that the way that I view success nowadays, or the way I'm trying to, is fulfillment, right? If you're doing something good and something that you enjoy and something that you have fun doing, then you're doing fine, right? Like, it's a bonus if you find people that you love to do it with you or to cheer you on from the sidelines. And, you know, in that same train of thought, like, I don't understand half of the things my friends are into or my friends care about, but like, I'm gonna be a cheerleader for them, right? Like, be the person that you yourself need. And I think that's a good note to end it on. You know, as our time here draws to a close, as always, I want to say thank you for listening, thank you for chatting, thank you for being you. You're listening to PodKast with a K, and I'm your host, Karla with a K, signing off. We now return to your regularly scheduled programming here on WECS 90.1 FM, or back to your day, whatever it is that you were doing before, whatever it is that you're doing now, whatever it is that you'll be doing later. I will hopefully see you next week with new nonsense and new guests, if luck allows. And for the time being, I will leave you with good luck, babe. Bye. Chappell Roan. Have a fantastic night.